by TÜBİTAK sponsorship, Turkish NSF sponsorship, and Recep Şentürk was one of the researchers in the project as well. And it is a kind of anthropology of Islam research, and it's a little bit different than the more social policy focus in this respect. It's more field research I will share with you. The research team conducted participant observations in 8 cities in Turkey, and we really sit like 2-3 hours, talk with over 200 individuals all around Turkey, and I also write my dissertation on the observations that we did during this project. And in this presentation I will share with our observations in this research the principal question that I will discuss with you today is: how do Muslims proceed from the fundamental claims of Islam to concrete economic decisions? How does religion affect one's economic behavior? This is the other question. In a broader sense, I will discuss the question of how one's commitment to certain knowledge is shaped and negotiated in everyday life situations. And this is where indeed I am really very much inspired by the literature followed by Assad, Sabah Mahmud, Hirschkind, and this anthropology of Islam and ethical subjectivity, issue of ethical subjectivity. In this conference we often hear the phrase, religion is important. There's no doubt about it, but how it is important, in what respect it is important, in what ways religion plays a crucial role in our lives needs further examination. And I'll try to do this if I'm successful. First, I should say that people in Turkey, and the ones at least we talk to, take religion seriously. There's no doubt about it. It will be misleading if I say people in Turkey, if it wouldn't be misleading, sorry, if I say people think in terms of religion. Religion provides the utmost important input when one struggles to differentiate what is good, right, and beautiful. And this is also the case when it comes to economic decisions. We realize in our in-depth interviews and participant observations that Muslims refers to Islam in various ways, and religiously motivated behavior and arguments manifest themselves in numerous ways. Some Muslims' interpretations express discontent about any dilution of doctrine. Some say they are really stressed when you argue for a dilution of the doctrine. Some others yet come up with radically new interpretations. Yet others do not even bother about interpretations. They simply act religiously without contemplating too much. They just act religiously. My proposal is that in order to understand this huge variation in religious responses and behaviors, we need to understand different modes of religious reasoning. This is the term that I suggest. We need to look into this concept of religious reasoning. And this is a term we propose to grasp the sociological reality of religion in Turkey. And when I say reasoning, some people may get annoyed because it reminds this Cartesian faculty when we put to use in maths, for instance. But I tried to somehow broaden the concept to include, for instance, our faculty when we face, for instance, injustice or some wrongdoing, when our face go to blush into red, for instance. And this kind of responses, I try to understand reasoning also to include this kind of responses that is situated in all of us. So I also inspired a lot by the Eisenstadt's definition. He points out that in all religious traditions, transcendental order is perceived as different, if not superior, higher or stronger than the mundane order. So he considered a tension between the two, the transcendental and the mundane. In the individual level, the tension manifests itself in search for salvation to judge the compatibility of this worldly affairs with the transcendental order. We are a kind of struggle to make the judgment between the two. The tension emerges in a genuine judgment. Am I leading a good life? And the reply to this question is phrased in religious terms for many of our interviewees in our field research. I phrase this tension as the tension between transcendental and mundane. In the case of Islam, it is claimed that it is religion with an overt claim to organize not only spiritual transcendental affairs but also everyday life. But whatever its claim is, it should be acknowledged that the two spheres are in constant struggle to colonize one another. This struggle redefines religious practices through drawing boundaries between the sacred and profane. When faced with tension between transcendental and mundane, the individual experiences strong feelings of unease, as a result of which he seeks to elevate them. You feel the tension, and this creates a kind of unease, and the resolution of that unease I term is religious reasoning. Because the minute you face a problem between the transcendental and mundane, and you get into a kind of process in order to elevate this tension, and that process itself is a religious reasoning. It's not reasoning as the Cartesian or other analytical philosopher will think of. There are 4 modes of religious reasoning I came across throughout the interviews. And I named them as, the first one is communitarian religious reasoning, the second one is utilitarian, the third one is principled, the fourth one is interpretive. And I will talk about each, how they manifest in our society, in the interviews that we made, let's say. Communitarian religious reasoning is exhibited mostly performatively in the way people behave. It's inscribed bodily, let's say. It's inscribed in reiterated bodily practices of individuals. This is the responses, as if, when you say, this is the way we do it around here. You don't really think too much. You don't reflect on or contemplate on the things, but you just say, this is the way we do things around here. And it's a kind of automatic response many times. For instance, in economic realm, starting work with Bismillah, saying like Allah bereket versin, or observing fairness in trade, hak geçmesin, kind of things that you come across a lot in the bazaars, for instance. In the case of very minute problem, people say hakkını helal et. If you go to the local market, pazar, here you will notice that communications is full of with religious symbols, mostly performed in automatic manners. Our economic life is full of with this religious symbolism, indeed. Similarly, in the interviews, this reasoning appears in my interviews responses upon hearing the word faiz, for instance, interest. They immediately say Allah korusun, God forbid. They don't really talk, tövbe kind of response they may bring. If you just ask him, what do you think about interest, faiz? Or Allah göstermesiniz, or heavens no kind of response you can hear. And a similar thing is also about rizq, the sustenance. All economic endeavor is perceived as partaking from God's blessing. You don't need to think too much about your sustenance, but God will give it to you anyway. If you, the second one is the utilitarian religious reasoning. It is operating when the reasoner engages with the techniques of Islam through incentives and teachings of Islam through incentives and threats. They just think of the incentives and the threats in Islam. The utilitarian reasoner weights his or her action in this world through consequences they will have for the afterlife, and behave accordingly. Utilitarian religious reasoning carries with it the burden of being unacceptable at times, because it's believed that God and religion should be embraced open-heartedly and not because of fine calculations. So therefore, utilitarian religious reasoning often appears as an attribute of the other person, and it's as if the others are really making these kind of calculations of this word halal or haram when they behave religiously, let's say. On one evening in Erzurum, I was sitting with a tea shop within a cafe, let's say, a kind of kahvehane. The atmosphere was very warm, and at some point someone began to tell a story. He said, the house of the pilgrim Haji burned down. When the firefighters were clearing away the debris, they noticed that there were 2 water supply pipes in the house. There were 2 different pipes, water system. One of them had a fully functional water meter attached to it, and the other did not. So they asked the Haji, the pilgrim, why there were 2 different water supplies. He replied to say that the one with the water meter attached he used for his ablutions, and the other one was used to meet the needs of the house, to cleaning the house. The other one for wudu. The water for the ablution is perceived as halal, while the other supply line was illegal. So he's almost embracing both of them within this, and he tries to reduce the tension by simply resorting to reducing tension by this kind of reasoning. And I came across similar examples throughout the research. Individual calculates gain in 2 spheres when it comes to religion. One is this worldly and the other is otherworldly. For instance, this fine calculation evaluations, like if you start work with Besmele, you will earn more in the world, and that day will be much more profitable if you do it. This is really instrumental way of understanding religion. Anyway, these kind of things I name them as utilitarian. The third one, principled religious reasoning emerges when reasoners adhere solely to one truth as it is literally appears in Quran and Hadith. It's a kind of literalist explanation. They argue for the subordination of values to a single system, which is their reading of Islamic teachings. Principled religious reasoners are eloquent and argumentational, but very often the logic of their argument is tautological. Principled reasoners refuse to recognize the legitimacy of other claims, therefore making dissent unacceptable. The first two was more automatic behaviors. Even those calculations were just done, they don't really calculate this, they just behave like that. But here, in the third and the fourth ways, we really see arguments. Yeah, you sit with them and you will talk like half an hour about how they interpret religious texts. This is important. They believe it's impossible to formulate an ideal economic model derived from Quran and Hadith. Several participants mentioned that economic relations are strictly regulated in Islam, and there is an ideal economic life prescribed in Islam. And one of our participants talked about notary verse in Quran. There is a notary verse, and he says, I'm quoting, "You are supposed to make contracts both within local world criteria and also within legal criteria." For instance, the verse 298 of Baqarah is this longest verse in Quran, which in one whole page talks about how contracts should be made. Baqarah verse 298. It refers to witness and states that everything needs to be written down. It has everything. That's why we call it notary verse, he says. Yani, they believe you can even find a contract in Quran. You don't need to do anything else. Everything is laid. And Islam is an economic model. It's finishing? Okay. Now the last one is the interpretive reasoning. This method is when Muslim believers express their skepticism towards the power of reason to formulate ultimate answers. But paradoxically, they also think that reason is the only tool that humankind have to come up with proper religious interpretation. They sit and they try to reinterpret religion, and they say that we cannot really take an economic model from Quran, but we need to do it ourselves. The Muslims should sit and discuss, and they should create of their own interpretation for religious model for economics. And they contextualize and historicize most of the religious texts, and they say we should come up with a brand new answer, but derived from religion. This is very important. It should be a religious answer. And conclusion, I suggest that there is not just one way of religious reasoning. There are many different ways, and individuals put to use these different kinds of religious reasonings. And for example, when you read Habermas, Rawls, they just think of one kind of religious reasoning which belong to monoglot citizens, as if people just behave from their comprehensive doctrines and they just take it as literally, and this is called religious reasoning. But when you make an anthropological research, you see that indeed there are many different kinds of religious reasoning. That's not the the characteristics of those monoglot citizens. Thank you very much.